Hello, welcome to another Q&A live session all about OET. My name is Rebecca and I'm here to answer your questions about preparing for OET. So whether you are a doctor, a nurse, or one of our other healthcare professions preparing for OET in the near future or a little bit further ahead, this is a great session for you to ask preparation questions and for me to answer them live on air. So hello and thank you to everybody joining so far. I can see numbers steadily rising. We've got over 100 people already joined us, many from Facebook, nearly 100 on Facebook and over 40 on YouTube. So whichever platform you're watching from, the format of the session is exactly the same. You can use the comment function in either YouTube or Facebook to submit a question to me, and I work my way through as many of them as I can in the next 60 minutes. And as I said, it could be on a topic for the test coming up very soon, or it could be just started on preparation and you want some tips about how to prepare for a test later on in the year. So whichever it is, don't be shy. Please do submit your questions and let's get started. So let's have a look. Thank you to everybody saying hello this morning. The first question is from Ward, who says, do I have to bring my own pen and pencil? Yes, you should bring your test day stationery with you. If you're taking the test at a test venue on paper, you need to bring with you the pens and pencils that you want to use during the test, as well as an eraser and a pencil sharpener is also recommended. So make sure you have those prepared and you start practicing with those same pens and pencils before test day. A question from Lawal. How do I approach an emergency case for OET speaking? So on the roll card that you have for your OET speaking test, and of course there's 2 role plays that you complete during the speaking test, there is setting information at the very top of the card, and this tells you where the conversation is taking place. And it might say, as in this question, that you're in an emergency department. And then there will be some background information and tasks. So the format of the card is always the same, but obviously if you know that the situation is an emergency, the background information will give brief details of why it is an emergency, and you have your tasks ready to complete. Now, the one big difference I would suggest when the task says it is an emergency is you need to imagine that situation. You need to imagine that the patient is in a lot of pain, or if you're talking to the relative, they're very anxious about the emergency situation. So it's good to start off by addressing that right at the beginning of the situation, giving a very brief introduction. For example, hello, my name's Rebecca. I'm going to look after you. I can see you're in a lot of pain, or I can see you're really worried about your daughter. Making some kind of statement to acknowledge how the person is feeling is a really good way of demonstrating you're familiar that this is an emergency and how to handle that in English. Amin says, is there any advice for the reading part, especially part C? So the reading part of the test and the listening part of the test are the same for all of the OET professions. And for reading, you will look at 2 longer texts and answer 8 questions about each of those texts. So an important consideration for reading is time management. You have 45 minutes to answer those 16 questions, plus the 6 questions from part B. So you do need to manage your time appropriately between those 2 parts of the test. We would recommend spending about 10 minutes answering those 6 questions for part B and leaving yourself 35 minutes to answer the 16 questions for reading part C. Now, the 2 texts are on completely different topics. So again, you need to make sure you manage your time and you allow roughly the same amount of time to answer each set of 8 questions, so that you're able to answer everything in the time limit and give yourself a good opportunity of scoring as highly as you can. Now, the answers are multiple choice. There are 4 answer options available for each question. And it may be that you find it easier to eliminate some answers than to automatically decide which is the correct answer. So both of those strategies work very well with reading Part C. Looking at the paragraph where the answer is contained and looking for evidence that the answer options are incorrect is as good a strategy as looking for evidence to find why one of the answer options is correct. And in any case, we really recommend that you don't do both things for every question anyway. Don't just try to find the correct answer and immediately move on without checking that there is evidence that the other answer options are incorrect. Doing that will give you the security and confidence that you have actually chosen the correct answer. Chitra, in the listening text of the audio, they are saying never, but the answer is 0. Now, I can't comment on the question paper that you're looking at. I'm not sure which one it is. My understanding would be that the answer key will give options in that situation to show that 0 could be also correct. But in unofficial practice tests, the quality of those materials may not be of good standard, and it may not reflect the test very well by including other answer options, for example, where more than one option could be possible for how to write down the answer. So do be careful about relying on materials that are not officially from OET. Abdullah says, is the passive form of writing better than the active form? Now, the passive form of writing allows us to put ourselves as the healthcare professional secondary to the patient or the treatment that we are providing. So instead of saying, I gave the patient their medication, you could say medication was administered, because the fact of giving the medication being given to the patient is much more important to the reader than the fact that I personally gave the medication to the patient. So the passive is a very useful construction in formal writing, in letters to healthcare professionals, because as I said, it does give you the possibility to put yourself either out of the sentence completely or at least secondary to the patient or the treatment. But it doesn't mean that you will only use passive forms in your writing. Active sentences are still going to be needed, and you're likely to use a mixture of both in the test. I've seen a couple of questions, this one from Mecca, but also from Mujahid, who says, is it possible to reduce the test fee? Now, that's an understandable question. Everybody wants to get a cheap price for everything. However, the work that goes into OET to make it a test that is suitable for healthcare professionals around the world is part of the reason for its cost. So compared to other high-stakes English tests that you may be familiar with, OET requires the input of not just English language experts, but also we need to consult healthcare experts who read and check all of the questions to make sure these are valid, these are appropriate to ask another healthcare professional, and the actual healthcare information is accurate. We're also a test that is run globally around the world. The test costs exactly the same regardless of where you are taking the test, and it also costs the same whether you take the test on paper or computer. So unfortunately, although the test is the cost that it is for those good reasons. And the other thing that candidates do tell us about the test is, although it is perhaps a higher cost than other tests available to them, they still feel it is the best value for money at the end of the day, because it's the only test that is actually preparing you for your work in an English-speaking healthcare environment. All of the work that you put in and all of the things that you're tested on in OET are skills that you're going to use in your real working life once you have your results and you register for work in one of those environments. Annika says, can you tell me, while mentioning the medication name, do we use capital letter or just lower letter, as in aspirin or aspirin? So the rule here is you use a small case first letter, so a small letter A for aspirin, because it is a generic name. So this is the name used by pharmacologists. It is the name given to this medication. And then there can be different brand names produced by the different pharmaceutical companies for sale or for prescription by doctors. And the brand names are spelt with a capital letter. So because aspirin is a generic name, it would be spelt with an A, small a. But a brand name, for example, Panadol is a brand name for paracetamol, which is the generic name. Panadol would be spelt with a capital P, whereas paracetamol, the generic name, would be spelt with a small c. So that's the rule about when to capitalize names for medication. Mansoor is asking about OET at home. So this is a version of the test that we're hoping to provide details about very soon for candidates. This will be allowing you, if you're not able to access a physical test venue, either for paper or computer, to take the test under secure conditions in your own home. So the question here from Mansoor is, when OET at home is available, will the certificate be any different from the one that's issued for test centres? So the answer to that is no. Candidates taking any version of OET, either on paper, on computer, or at home, will all receive the same type of statement of results. It's released to your candidate portal, so you don't receive a hard copy. You receive an online statement of results, and that's exactly the same regardless of the mode of delivery that you took the test. And that is the evidence that you provide to the regulator when you apply using your OET results. This question from Plab Journey: I forgot to write yours sincerely, doctor. At the end of my letter, how many marks did I lose? This is an unfortunate mistake. You won't be alone. I'm sure other candidates have done exactly the same thing. They have run out of time to just end the letter. Now, this is counted under the assessment criteria, organisation and layout. Layout looking at whether your letter meets the criteria of a letter, so the way that it's starting and the way that it's ending. So the fact that you have missed the ending off will cause some penalty in that individual criteria, but it's unlikely to make any significant impact on your final overall score. So if everything else about your letter was written very strongly, very accurately, the fact that you have a slightly reduced score for organisation and layout shouldn't end up changing the final letter grade that you receive. Maria says, I'm a nurse from the Philippines. Can I ask if it's okay to write on the materials? Would it provide an issue for checking because the answers are corrected by computer? So, Maria, I think you're focusing here on listening B and C and reading B and C, which are computer marked. The answer to that is it's still absolutely fine to write on your test papers if you're taking the test on paper. And provided that you don't make marks around the answer area where the letters are shaded, then the computer won't have any difficulty reading your answers and won't be distracted by the fact that there are notes on the paper. But the best way for me to really explain how it is okay and what you should do is I'm posting the link to a video we published in Facebook, a couple of years ago, which explains what is and isn't allowed when you're writing on the test paper. So I've just posted that into the comments. Have a look at that video, and that will explain really clearly what you can do. Christy is saying, are there any updates for the writing module? Like first we have to write purpose, then name, then last name. There haven't been any updates to any part of OET recently, and there aren't any planned for the future. So there hasn't been anything about how you write your introduction or anything like that. The information is still the same, and the guidance that we provide on the website for OET is the best place to go to learn more about the test. And I'm going to post another link into the comment box now, which is to our writing guide. This is a really popular resource for candidates. It takes you through the different assessment criteria and what the assessors are looking for. So I think that will help Christy understand the best way to approach the writing test. Shahinez is saying, I'm struggling with my OET speaking preparation. Do you have any tips, please? So for speaking, as with all parts of the test, the best tip really is to practice as much as you can. Now, some of you will already be working and speaking in English, and perhaps already speaking with patients in English. And so to make the most use of those opportunities to practice your English is a really good option. However, even if you're not using English at work every day, or you're not getting the opportunity to speak English with patients, you still need to try to do some of that practice either with friends or family who can take the role of your patient, so you can do that practice of having a role play, because the situations are very realistic in the role plays. You'll be very familiar with the situations, but you do need to practice that feeling of completing a conversation with a patient, so that prior to test day, you feel comfortable about how it will work. You've practiced both providing information in the role play, but also listening and then responding to requests for information or clarification that your patient gives you. It is a two-way conversation. So you do need to practice both parts of that, speaking and listening, then responding. So the best tip that I would suggest is to practice speaking, and you can do that, as I said, with friends or family or colleagues if possible. And the other thing that I would mention, so here's another link into the comment box, is to make sure you're familiar with the assessment criteria for speaking. To make sure you know what the assessors are looking for, because like writing, that's going to be really important. And I'm just going to pop up onto the screen the link to our preparation page. So I've just been posting several links into the comment box. All of these can be found from the OET Prepare page. So if you're not visiting the OET Prepare page regularly, you should definitely bookmark this page and make sure you're checking out the information that we have there. We add new blog posts very regularly. We add more information. We also, this is our place for updating you with news. So it's definitely a good place to go if you want to find more preparation materials, but also more advice. And as I said, any news that we have to share about new venues opening, we will share details about OET at home on our website and that sort of thing. All right, let's go back to the questions. I'm going to skip ahead to make sure I'm capturing some of the more recent questions that have come through as well. So here's a question from Chizoba, who says, can I lose marks for spelling in listening? It does depend a little bit on the spelling mistake. So the assessors are prepared to be flexible about spelling for listening part A because you are writing as you are listening. But you should still try to be as accurate as possible with your spelling, because some spelling mistakes won't be permitted. So, for example, if you've ended up writing the wrong word by accident, but it spells a different word, then you are definitely going to get that marked incorrect. So I can give you an example of the word waist, meaning around your hip area, around your stomach. If you'd written the spelling for the refuse, the rubbish kind of waste that goes in the bin, then that would be marked incorrect, because that has a different meaning, and the assessors have no idea whether you understood it was part of the body or you thought it was meaning of rubbish. So you do need to be careful with your spelling. However, there are opportunities for the assessors, as I said, to be flexible. If you haven't spelt the word absolutely correctly, they can understand what you have written, and that is the correct answer. They may be able to give you the mark for it. Sheetal says, should it be Mr. X, comma, aged 30, or Mr. X, semicolon, aged 30? So here I think you're referring to the reference line, the RE line. Now, this is a standard addition to healthcare writing, and it's a way for the reader to identify the person that you are writing to them about. So the standard inclusion for the reference line is their name and their date of birth, because both of those pieces of information can be fed into their computer system, and they can identify that patient from those pieces of information. Age would be a secondary choice, because you cannot search for patient details via age. So our recommendation would be to include the patient's name and their date of birth, and then to include the age, if you wish, in the actual body of the letter. Now, that's our recommendation because it's considered best practice when it comes to healthcare writing. However, on test day, if you've written the age in the reference line, you won't be penalized specifically for it. So it's one of those instances where we're trying to teach you the best way of doing it for real life, but it's not something the assessors will penalize if you don't do that on test day. Iveta is saying, why is there no information and resources for veterinarians, only human medicine? So Iveta, do head over to the prepare page that I just mentioned. It was coming up on the screen at the bottom. You'll find their sample tests for vets. So there are 4 writing tests for vets, and there are 4 roll cards for vets. Also on our YouTube page, @official OET, you'll find 2 videos there specifically for vets, how to approach the veterinary writing test and how to approach the veterinary speaking test. So we definitely do have resources available for you. And if you want further materials than those that I've just mentioned, you can also find the official practice book for vets in the OET shop. And that's true for all professions. There's an official practice book containing 3 further practice tests in the OET shop specific to your profession. AJ says, can you please tell me regarding commas in the introduction paragraph of the letter, please? Now, it doesn't matter where in the letter it is. It could be any paragraph of the letter. Commas are used for a variety of reasons, to separate parts of a sentence, to separate information, to make it clearer for the reader. And commas depend on the sentence, not individual words as such. And there are some rules that you can follow, and we have a number of blog articles explaining those different rules of commas. And we would recommend going and having a look at the OET blog. I'll post a link to that in the comments. Again, it can be found from the prepare page of the OET website. But in the OET blog, there's a search function. And if you enter commas into the search box of the OET blog, you'll find, as I say, a number of articles to help whether you're confident or not very confident yet about use of commas, how to use them more appropriately. Annika has a follow-up question about using the generic or brand names of the medication. You're not penalized if you have mistakenly used a capital letter on the medication name and it should have been a small case letter. So generally on your case notes, unless the generic name of the medication is very universal, both the generic and brand name for the medication will be provided. So it should be clear for you to know which one is generic, because it will have the lowercase, and brand because it will be capitalized. But as I said, if you do make that kind of mistake, it isn't going to be penalized by the assessors. Adele says, with regards to the test result report, why isn't it included the details of performance, for example, the result of each part of the test, to know where the weak points are to try to strengthen them? So while we can't produce that amount of detailed feedback, i.e. your results in each part of the test, your numerical score does give you evidence of whether you performed strongly in that part of the test compared to the result that you wanted, or whether you had weaknesses. And if you had weaknesses, how far from your required results you were in that area to know that you need to work on it. So somebody, for example, who's aiming for a B grade, which is a 350 in a numerical score, if they're receiving something around a 290 for one part of the test, they know that that's quite a weak area for them, and they're going to need to spend some time improving on that skill before they consider any kind of resit. Whereas somebody who scores a 340 or even a 360 knows that their result is borderline. They're either just not quite good enough, so a little bit of extra effort would be required, or 360, they've achieved the required result, but it was only just. So it would still be an area worth working on for the future. Maggie says, I can't download my results to my phone. Please, can you tell me why? So any kind of question relating to your results or applications for the test, we recommend you contact OET customer service. And the best way to contact them is via live chat, which is available 24 hours a day, Monday to Friday. And you can access live chat from the green help button, which pops up on the OET website. In terms of sharing results, you would share your statement of results online with your verifier. And there are help articles on the OET website about how you do that. You don't need to send regulators physical copies of your results. You provide them access to check your results online. Sigdem is saying, are we allowed to go back to the parts we've already finished if we have time? This depends a little bit on the part of the test that you're taking. And also the mode of delivery for the test that you're taking. So if you're taking computer-based OET at a venue, then as each part of the test is finished, it's submitted to the computer system and you're not able to return to it. On paper, it's pretty similar as well. The only parts of both tests you're really able to move backwards and forwards between is reading parts B and C. So you have access to all of the part B and part C questions for the entire 45 minutes of the test. So you can go forward and back between those parts of the test as you wish during those 45 minutes. But for example, reading part A is completed absolutely separately for both on paper and on computer. And once those 15 minutes for part A are completed, those test papers are submitted, and then you move on to parts B and C. So there's no opportunity once you're started part B and C to return to reading part A. All right, I'm going to move forward again to some more recent questions. Mecca says, can you please tell about the evaluation of the speaking audios? Is there any role for the interlocutor to put marks? So the interlocutor has no impact on the score that you receive. They don't have any part in the evaluation or scoring of your speaking role plays. Their role is simply to facilitate the conversation. So they take the part of your patient or their relative, and you complete the conversation with them. They record the conversation, obviously, but those audios are then submitted to the assessment team here in Melbourne, and all of the assessment is done here by our trained assessors. So the interlocutors have no role whatsoever in the marking of your test. Sheetal says, are signal markers like socially regarding the past medical history in view of the above necessary? It really depends on your sentence, on your paragraph, how you are using them to connect to previous ideas. One thing I would certainly say is you only need to use markers like this if it's adding something for the reader. I certainly would think twice about including any of those if you could remove that and the sentence is still very strong without it, and the reader hasn't lost any information by that marker being removed. So it could be useful in some letters, but I certainly wouldn't assume that I'd be using it every time. Mohammed says, what is the best method to solve reading part A? So we just touched on reading part A being completed in 15 minutes and completed absolutely separately to parts B and C of the test. So you have 15 minutes to answer 20 questions. And those 20 questions are all about 4 short texts on one healthcare topic. And the topic and texts are all around the kinds of information that healthcare professionals need to refer to quickly. So it could be information about treating a patient with a fracture, for example, or checking medication details, something like this, something that in real life you would be expected to look at pretty quickly to retrieve information so that treatment for the patient could continue. Our recommendation for reading part A is to complete the questions in the order that they are written. We know that some candidates prefer to answer the second or third set of questions before the first set. That's individual opinions, and if that's a strategy that works for those particular candidates, that's absolutely fine. But our recommendation is, from the way that those test questions were written, the first set of questions, which require you to just identify which of the 4 texts, A, B, C, or D, certain information can be found. They've been written to help you start to quickly understand the different contexts and contents of those 4 texts. And by answering those questions first, it should then make finding the answers for the next sets of questions more straightforward, because you now have a good overall awareness of the difference between the 4 texts and the information that they contain. MV says, is it appropriate to ask, is it Mr. John's room in the speaking test to confirm the right patient? Potentially, this could be an appropriate thing to ask. It would obviously depend on what the setting was. And I would assume in this case you would be visiting the patient in an aged care facility or perhaps on a hospital ward if the patient had a private room. I would think, though, there might be a better way of starting the conversation than this. If it's clear from the background information that this is the first time you've spoken to the patient, perhaps just introducing yourself and checking, it's Mr. John, isn't it? Or asking them to provide their name. I think either of those might be slightly more appropriate, but that one could be possible given the context, and the assessors would be fine with that. Another question about speaking: if it says in the background information on the speaking roll card that you've already examined the patient, how can I deal with this? Should I start with a greeting? So in this kind of situation, as the Cabinet has said, the background information will mention a little bit of information about the patient, and it will say something like, you have just examined the patient. In this case, you are imagining that the conversation has already started before the interlocutor pressed record. So the conversation had started with greetings and so forth, and you've now examined the patient, and this is at the point where the recording starts. So you don't need to give any kind of introduction. You can imagine that in real life would already have happened. You are starting purely from the point that it gives you on the roll card, which is you've just examined the patient. So you start directly with task 1. Thank you for letting me examine you, or now that I've had a look, would you like me to tell you what I think? Something like that, depending on whatever task 1 is about, is what you need to do for those kinds of roll cards. There's no need to start with an introduction or greeting. Jisha is asking whether I can discuss the August 7 writing test. So I cannot talk to you about previous test papers. I don't get to see the test papers. I've no idea what the writing test was for August the 7th. But also I do need to remind candidates that test materials are confidential outside of the test room. And that's something that you have all signed on the front page of every test paper to agree to keeping those materials confidential. So it's also something candidates shouldn't be discussing amongst themselves for those reasons. TS says, is it important to complete all your speaking card tasks? What happens if the time is up before you do? So the tasks that are given on your roll card, and there's usually around 5 or 6 tasks, are there to enable you to continue talking for the full 5 minutes of your role play. And the reason for that is we're trying to help you to give the assessors as much language as possible to make assessment of your speaking easy for them to do. So we give you those tasks to make sure that you have enough to talk about and you're not going to run out of things to say in the 5 minutes. What that does mean, though, is that it may not be possible for you to complete absolutely everything in that time. And that's okay. You should be managing the time in the role play. And that means perhaps during your preparation time, having a look at the different tasks and just giving each of them a rough time limit. So identifying which of the tasks you feel you could complete quite quickly with the patient, which ones would take a little bit longer, so that when you're starting the role play, you move through the tasks in a suitable fashion, so you're not spending too long on something that could be completed in 30 seconds or whatever. But if you do that, if you manage your time, if you move the conversation forward, but you just run out of time to complete everything, that's absolutely fine, and it won't have a significant impact on your final score. Gismol says, can we write numerical numbers in letter writing, or should it be words? So 4 years the number or 4 years the letters. Both are accepted, absolutely, and you choose whichever you prefer. So both numbers and words for numbers are accepted in writing. Basil says, could we use copy and paste in reading and writing parts for OET at home? So taking OET on computer, whether that's at a test venue or in the future, whether it's at home in the secure testing environment, copy and paste function will be disabled for the writing test. If you're completing one of our practice computer tests from our website, you may have noticed that you can copy and paste in that practice test. But the difference is that when you take your actual test, either, as I say, on the computer at a test venue, or when OET at home becomes available, then the software for the program, the testing program, will lock down your computer to only have the test software running, and copy and paste is disabled. So you won't be able to use copy and paste in those parts of the test. And you need to practice without being able to do those things. Precious says, what's the number of correct answers to score a grade B in both listening and reading? So the advice that we give to candidates is to, when they're practicing with official practice tests from OET, if you've got a score which is between 30 to 32, 30, 31, 32 correct, you can feel comfortable that you're ready to apply for your test. That is the score that we recommend as a minimum you are aiming for in your preparation to get a B grade. Now, obviously, as I said, that's the minimum. So ideally, as you're preparing for the test, you'd like to see a higher score than that to feel even more confident on test day that you're going to get the score that you want. But once you start achieving those scores regularly in your practice, that's the time to book your test. And a second question from Precious, what are distractors and inference, I think you mean, in OET reading? So distractors are parts of information in the text or the question that are almost correct or suggest something that makes you feel it is the correct answer, but when you check the text, you find that it isn't accurate enough to be the correct answer. So a distractor is something possible. It looks like it could be an answer, but as I said, once you check the text, you find that it is in fact incorrect or not sufficiently accurate, and there is a more accurate answer to be correct. Inference in reading is another way of saying this is reading between the lines. So this is understanding the opinion or attitude of the writer from the words that they have written without them having to actually spell it out. So often, for example, we can understand how the writer feels about the topic, whether they feel positive about it, whether they feel negative or neutral, from the choices of words that they use to write about the topic. And as I said, inference means that they can write their opinion without actually naming it. So they don't have to say, I'm really happy about this. They can just use positive sounding words, and then we can infer from that that they feel positive about the topic. Rafa says, with regard to the instructions on the reading test, should we capitalize the first letter of every answer? Especially on the identification part, or should we always write the answers on small cases, given that they're only words or phrases and not sentences? This isn't something that you need to worry too much about, Rafa. You're not going to be penalized for capitalizing or not capitalizing the first letter of each word. The only time where a capital letter might be absolutely necessary is if the word in the text is an acronym, for example, so a string of capitalized letters like NMC, the Nursing Midwifery Council, that would need to be written all in capital letters. As you know, our advice is that you copy the answer directly from the text. So if the answer is capitalized in the text, I would repeat the capitalization in my answer. If it's not the same, I wouldn't. Ibn is asking a test a question about the location of a venue. So I mentioned a little bit earlier, with these types of questions, please do get in touch with customer service. They can assist you with all sorts of questions about test day, test venues, and so forth. And live chat, as I mentioned, the green help button on the OET website is the best place to go to get a quick answer. All right, let's have a look at, again, some more recent questions. Here we go. Paige says, if DOB is written in the reference line, is it okay to write the age in the first paragraph, or is it better not to put it? So this goes back to a question that I was answering earlier, which was that our recommendation is that you include the patient's date of birth in the RE line rather than their age. And you can include their age in the main part of the letter if you wish. However, having said that, we would never recommend calculating the age yourself from their date of birth. If the age is also provided within the case notes, then you can choose to include it in the introduction, but you're not required to calculate the patient's age from their date of birth, and it's not something that we would recommend spending any seconds of your time doing. So if both date of birth and age are provided, you can make use of them. Otherwise, in official tasks, it's likely that only the date of birth would be provided, and that's what you would include in the reference line. Rabat is saying there isn't a test venue in Tunisia. So as I've mentioned, we're hoping to announce more details about OET at home, which is an option for candidates who don't have access to a physical test venue, either on paper or on computer. So Rabat, look out for that information, which, as I said, should be coming soon now. And it may be possible for you to take OET at home in Tunisia if there's no test venue there. Aubrey is mentioning whether we will upload some more practice tests in the website. So as well as the free official practice tests available on the website, I mentioned earlier the official practice book for each OET profession available in the shop, and that includes 3 further sets of practice tests. So if you're looking for more sample test materials, I would encourage you to purchase that as a suitable and official source of preparation materials. Annika says, how many scores will be deducted by minor mistakes like or an? So to explain how the writing test and the speaking tests are assessed, your overall writing and overall speaking performance is assessed using the assessment criteria we mentioned a little bit earlier. And mistakes are covered in different assessment criteria. And individual mistakes are not automatically penalized. The overall communication is looked at, and as I mentioned earlier with the example of the candidate omitting yours sincerely, doctor, from the end of the letter, that would have a minor reduction in one criteria but wouldn't have an overall penalty on the final score. With grammar mistakes like articles, these are assessed in separate criteria. So for writing, that would be in the language criteria, but it also is, that same criteria is also looking at your use of spelling, punctuation, and vocabulary. So it's only a small part of one of the assessment criteria. If you have made mistakes with articles throughout your letter, then that would certainly have a small impact on your score for language. But individual mistakes, once or twice, are unlikely to have any significant impact whatsoever on your score. Gismol says, how should be the introduction in the writing letter? How many sentences can be used there? So there are no maximum or minimum numbers of sentences that you can use in the introduction or any other paragraph, nor are there any maximum or minimum numbers of paragraphs that you can use in your letter. You communicate the information in the best way possible for your reader, and you make that paragraph as long or as short as you think it needs to be. If you didn't hear me earlier, please go back through the comments to find the link I made to the writing guide, which gives really good guidance about how to prepare for the writing test and exactly what the assessors are looking for. Here's a piece of good news that I'd like to share, because I think it's good to boost everyone's confidence and feelings. So congratulations, Jojo. I've recently passed my test with 4 Bs. That's an excellent result. And it's good to hear that you were preparing as early as April for your test. Probably you took that in July. So that's a really good piece of news and a nice, happy result for everybody. But congratulations, particularly to you. Joanna says, can we use erasable pen in writing or pencil only? So there are rules and restrictions about the test day stationery you can use for the paper test. You wouldn't be able to use an erasable pen for writing. The only type of pen that you can use is a ballpoint pen, and one without a click. So if you can click your pen up and down, or you can twist your pen, that type of pen isn't permitted on test day. It has to be just a pen without any functions to it, or a pencil. It is your choice for most parts of the test whether you can use pen or pencil, but it wouldn't be possible to use an erasable pen. If you are anxious about making mistakes in pen, you want to change something that you've written, just draw a line clearly through the words that you want discounted and write your final answer next to it. Tahir says, are we allowed to carry our own stopwatch at the venue? So just talking about restrictions for test day, watches, clocks of any kind are not allowed in the test room. If you're taking a paper test, the time will be displayed at the front of the room, and the invigilators will also remind you when you have 5 or 10 minutes remaining in your test. If you're taking the test on computer at a venue, then the time is clearly displayed at the top of your screen throughout your test. May says, is it okay to write answers in all capital letters, including for writing? This is your preference. You can write everything in capital letters if you wish, but it's in no ways mandatory. As I said, it's your preference. If this is how you prefer to write, then you can do that, and that is acceptable. Rafa is saying, in the listening test, is it okay to write in small letters even though it's a brand name of the medication? Yes, absolutely. That kind of answer would be accepted by the assessors. Gismol says, can we write the short form, which will be given in the case notes, or should it be expanded? So obviously the case notes are written in note form. It says it in the title that they're case notes. And so short forms, abbreviations, symbols even, are a common feature of notes. But you are writing a formal letter to another healthcare professional in which abbreviations and short forms are not seen as so suitable. Now, some short forms might be appropriate. For example, if the short form relates to some kind of specialism and you're writing to the specialist, that short form would be absolutely very familiar to them and would be appropriate for you to use. But in other situations, we would recommend expanding those short forms into full forms to keep the formality of the letter that you are writing. Paige says, if the patient is to be referred to a community nurse, are we going to exclude in the letter the patient's mobility, like use of a walker or walking stick? Now, in every letter that you're writing, what is included or excluded really comes down to the writing task. What are you writing to the reader about? And what are you asking them to do for the patient to continue their care? And that information, as I said, comes from the writing task. Sometimes more detail about the request of what you're asking the reader to do is also provided at the very end of the case notes. So you need to focus on that information. What am I asking the reader to do to help decide which information needs to be included, which information can be excluded? So relating to the patient's mobility, this will depend on what you're asking the community nurse to do. If they're visiting the patient at home, if they're monitoring the patient's progress, they may need to know about their mobility, but it will depend on what the writing task has said. Lisa says, whenever we attend the speaking and listening questions, we do reading also. So why can you not give some score for reading from speaking and listening like PTE? I'm sorry, Lisa, I don't really understand that question. For OET candidates, most of the healthcare regulators that accept OET results require candidates to sit all 4 subtests each time they take OET. So if you need to resit your test, the regulator will expect you to take all 4 parts of the test. That we cannot give individual results because the regulators won't accept them in that way. They need to all come from the same test sitting. All right, I'm just going to scroll right to the end to answer a last few questions. This question, how to deal with very short case notes, as I cannot get the required number of words without including irrelevant data. Here I would suggest perhaps you're using unofficial practice test materials or very old practice test materials that aren't of current standard or good quality, and that's why they're very short. All of the test materials used on our website, in our practice books, in the shop and so forth, have sufficient detail to produce a letter within the 40 minutes that is roughly between 180 and 200 words. So this is one of those reasons why it's so important to use official materials so that you're getting a good reflection of what it will be like on test day. This is slightly related from your niece. Is it okay if we write less than 180 words for writing as long as all the information is provided? So as I just mentioned, the case notes are sufficient to write a letter in 40 minutes of roughly 180 to 200 words. And that's, as I said, rough. The assessors are not going to count the words. What they're looking at is whether you've included all of the necessary information the reader needs. If you've done that, you haven't quite hit 180 words, that's not going to have a penalty for your score if you've managed to, as I say, include all of the information correctly. All right, one last question. This question from WS, if the interlocutor is replying in short phrases causing speedy completion of tasks, is it okay to ask history question at the end to finish the 5 minutes? Will examiners consider the interlocutor response? So during the role play, you have a card with the information of your tasks to complete, and the interlocutor also has that information with some details about what they will say in response to you. They don't have a script, but their card gives some suggestions of what they will answer to you. The idea, of course, is that they don't take up too much time of the conversation. We want to hear you speaking as much as possible. So it may be that you need to spend a little bit longer if you're finishing the role play earlier than 5 minutes. You need to spend a little bit longer on your explanations, or providing details of treatment options or whatever, so that you are taking up the time required for 5 minutes. But you can finish up the role play if you've done everything on the tasks you feel you've covered in sufficient detail, asking clarification questions so they need any more information at the end of the role play is absolutely appropriate. All right, so thank you for all of those questions. The hour always flies by, and I can never answer all of them, but I've scrolled through and answered a good cross-section of the questions that came through in the next hour. As always, I will be back for more of these sessions. The next session is going to be in 2 weeks' time. It will be into September then, so it will be on the 1st of September. This time later in the day in Australia, which is a good time option for those of you who are early risers in the UK, or in the afternoon for India and the Philippines. So feel free to join me then for another of those sessions. I'm also looking forward to returning for a live chat next week, which is an informal chance to catch up with you to find out how life is treating you. And we just talk about some topical issues about life. It's not test related particularly, but it's a nice way of catching up while we're all still living with coronavirus. So one way or the other, I hope to see you again very soon. Thank you for your time today, and take care of yourselves. Bye for now.